In the space of a few minutes on a June morning in 1942, 3 Japanese aircraft carriers were turned into burning wrecks, and the entire Pacific War changed direction. 6 months earlier, Japan had crippled the American fleet at Pearl Harbor, and then run wild, conquering an empire across the Pacific almost without a check. From Hawaii to the edge of Australia, from the coast of Asia to the far islands of the south, the rising sun seemed to conquer at will. At the heart of that empire was a strike force of aircraft carriers that had not lost a single major battle. Its crews were the best in the world, and brimming with confidence some would later call victory disease. This is the story of how a tiny American outpost, a handful of codebreakers, and a few squadrons of outnumbered pilots broke that force in a single day. This is Midway. Japan's greatest admiral, Isoroku Yamamoto, understood a hard truth. Japan could not win a long war against American industry. His only hope was one more knockout blow. Though he built a trap, he would attack a small American base at Midway, a speck of coral in the Central Pacific that the U.S. Navy could not afford to lose. When the American carriers rushed out to defend it, Yamamoto's fleet, far larger, would be waiting to ambush and destroy them once and for all. It was a clever plan, but a fragile one. He split his ships into scattered groups spread across 1,000 miles of sea and sent a decoy force north toward Alaska to pull the Americans the wrong way. And it rested on one assumption above all others, that the Americans would have no idea he was coming. That assumption was already broken. In a windowless basement at Pearl Harbor, a team of American codebreakers led by Commander Joseph Rochefort had cracked into the Japanese naval code. It was brutal, painstaking work. Rochefort's team all but lived in that basement, sleeping in shifts and chain-smoking over stacks of intercepts, hunting for patterns in an ocean of numbers. They could not read every word, but they read enough. They knew a huge operation was coming, and that its target was a place the Japanese called only AF. Rochefort was certain AF meant Midway. Washington was not, so he set a trap of his own. He had Midway broadcast a radio message in plain language that its water plant had broken down and the island was running short of fresh water. Within a day, the codebreakers intercepted a Japanese report. AF, it said, is short of water. The bait was taken. AF was Midway. Now Admiral Chester Nimitz knew where the Japanese were going, roughly when, and from which direction. The ambushers were about to be ambushed. For the first time in the Pacific War, the Americans would understand the enemy's plan better than some of the enemy's own commanders did. Nimitz made a bold call. He gathered every carrier he had and sent them to lie in wait northeast of Midway, hidden on Yamamoto's flank. He had 3 carriers to Japan's 4 and far fewer aircraft. He needed every one, and one of his 3 was a wreck. The carrier Yorktown had been badly mauled weeks earlier in the Coral Sea. The shipyard's estimate to repair her ran to 3 months. Nimitz gave them 72 hours. Workers swarmed over her around the clock, and in 3 days, patched and half-fixed and still leaking, Yorktown sailed back out to fight. It was a gamble stacked on a gamble. Fewer ships, fewer planes, a wounded carrier, all against the finest fleet afloat. But surprise was on the American side, and at sea, surprise is everything. At dawn on June 4, 1942, the Japanese struck first, launching a wave of aircraft to smash the defenses on Midway. The attack hit hard, but the island's airfield survived, and now the Japanese commander, Admiral Nagumo, made a fateful choice. He ordered his reserve planes, armed with torpedoes to attack ships, to be rearmed with bombs for a second strike on the island. Then in the middle of that switch, a scout plane radioed the news he dreaded. American carriers were out there after all, and they were close. Nagumo froze in an agonizing decision, with bombs, torpedoes, and fuel lines strewn across his hangar decks. He hesitated, and that hesitation would cost Japan the Pacific War. For those few minutes, his carriers were at their most vulnerable, decks crowded, weapons and gasoline exposed, caught between one mission and the next. The American carriers had already flung their planes into the sky, in a ragged, desperate, uncoordinated rush. The attack was a mess. Squadrons arrived in scattered pieces, out of position and low on fuel. By every rule of war, it should have been a failure. First to find the enemy were the torpedo bombers, slow and lumbering, skimming low over the waves with no fighter cover at all. They flew straight into a wall of anti-aircraft fire and swarms of nimble Japanese Zero fighters. It was very nearly suicide. Torpedo Squadron 8 from the carrier Hornet bored in alone. All 15 of its planes were shot down, not one scored a hit. Of the 30 men in that squadron, a single pilot survived, Ensign George Gay, shot down into the sea, hiding beneath a floating cushion, watching the rest of the battle rage around him. Squadron after squadron met the same fate. The torpedo planes were being massacred, and yet, without knowing it, they were about to win the battle. To butcher the low-flying torpedo planes, the Japanese fighters had come screaming down to sea level. The sky high above the carriers was suddenly and fatally left wide open. At that very moment, far above, a formation of American dive bombers arrived, nearly out of fuel and very nearly lost. Their commander, Wade McCluskey, had found empty ocean where the enemy should have been. Running low on options and gas, he spotted a lone Japanese destroyer racing north and gambled that it was hurrying to rejoin the fleet. He followed it, and it led him straight to the Japanese carriers, their decks packed with fueled and armed aircraft, and not one fighter left up high to stop him. For the Japanese sailors on those crowded decks, there was almost no warning, only a rising scream of engines from high above as the American planes plunged straight down at them. The dive bombers rolled over and fell out of the sky. Their bombs punched through the wooden flight decks into hangars stacked with bombs, torpedoes, and gasoline. The carriers blew apart from the inside. In a devastating few minutes, 3 of Japan's 4 carriers, the Akagi, the Kaga, and the Soryu, were left blazing from bow to stern, doomed. Japanese damage control crews fought the flames with everything they had, but the fires fed on their own bombs and fuel and could not be stopped. The famous 5 minutes that changed the war is a bit of a simplification. The attacks were spread out more than that, but the result was very real, and for Japan, it was a catastrophe. One Japanese carrier, the Huryu, was still untouched, and it struck back hard. Its planes found the Yorktown, the patched-up survivor, and hammered her with bombs and torpedoes until she went dead in the water and the crew abandoned ship. But late that afternoon, American dive bombers found the Huryu too and set her ablaze like the others. By nightfall, all 4 Japanese carriers were sinking or gone. In a single afternoon, Japan's proud carrier force, undefeated in 6 months of war, had been all but wiped from the sea. The Yorktown refused to die easily. She stayed afloat for 2 more days as crews fought to save her. Then a Japanese submarine slipped through the escorts and put 2 torpedoes into her side. The last American carrier lost at Midway went down on June 7th. When the smoke cleared, Japan had lost 4 fleet carriers, the very heart of the force that had terrorized the Pacific. The United States had lost 1. Worse for Japan, it had lost hundreds of irreplaceable veteran pilots and mechanics, the skilled men who could never be quickly rebuilt. Before Midway, Japan was on the attack everywhere. After Midway, it would never truly be on the attack again. The torpedo crews who died without landing a single hit had not died for nothing. Their sacrifice pulled down the enemy fighters and cleared the sky for the men who broke the fleet. In a single day, a handful of codebreakers and a few hundred outnumbered airmen had reversed the entire tide of the Pacific War. It has been called the most stunning and decisive blow in the history of naval warfare, an incredible victory at a place most of the world had never heard of. Next time, we leave the Pacific for the frozen forests of Europe and Hitler's last desperate gamble in the West, the Battle of the Bulge.